The notification chime from my phone pierced the quiet Saturday morning. I glanced down, expecting a text from my mom or maybe a friend confirming our lunch plans. Instead, an unfamiliar Instagram handle flashed on my screen with a preview that made my stomach drop. "He's taking everything and leaving you." My hand trembled as I unlocked my phone. The full message loaded with a photo attached. A young woman with sleek blonde hair and perfect makeup sitting in my husband Mark's BMW, her red-painted fingernails resting possessively on his thigh. His face was partially cropped, but I'd recognize that watch anywhere. The Rolex I'd given him for our 10th anniversary 3 years ago. "Thought you should know he's chosen me," the message continued. "We're planning our new life and he's taking everything when he leaves you. Too bad you wasted 15 years on him." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I set my coffee mug down before I dropped it, breathing deeply through the sudden nausea. My first instinct wasn't to cry or scream, it was to think about our accounts. About the passwords. About everything I knew. You see, I hadn't always been just Mark Adams' wife. Long before I met him, I was Sarah Mitchell from Greenville, a small town where luxury meant having cable TV and a reliable car. My parents had worked hard, Dad at the local factory, Mom as a school administrator, to put me through community college. I'd been so proud to land my first office job at age 20, working as an administrative assistant at Hudson Bank where Mark was just starting as a junior financial advisor. Back then he wasn't the polished man he'd become. His suits were off the rack, his car was a used Honda, and his ambition was the most impressive thing about him. I remember the first time he asked me out, so nervous he spilled coffee on his tie right before approaching my desk. I found it endearing how human he seemed despite his professional demeanor. "You know more about the filing system than anyone," he joked on our third date. "I bet you'd be great with numbers too." That casual comment became prophetic. Within 2 years we were married and settling into our first home, a modest 3-bedroom in a developing suburb that we could barely afford. Mark was building his client base, working 60-hour weeks while I continued at the bank, eventually moving into the loan processing department. "We're saving for our future," he'd say whenever I questioned a particularly frugal decision. And I believed him. We lived carefully, tracking every expense in spreadsheets I maintained. When he opened his own financial advisory firm with 3 partners 7 years ago, it seemed natural that I would help with the bookkeeping part-time to save on expenses. "No one I trust more than you, Sarah," he'd said, teaching me their accounting software and giving me access to everything. "You understand the value of a dollar better than anyone I know." I stared at the glowing phone screen, the taunting message from this woman, Amber according to her profile, and thought about the hours I'd spent hunched over our home computer, meticulously categorizing expenses, reconciling accounts, preparing quarterly reports for Mark's partners. I knew every password, every account number, every client's portfolio structure. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was pinching pennies at the grocery store, comparing prices and using coupons, Mark had apparently been spending freely on his mistress. The diamond tennis bracelet visible on her wrist in the photo looked exactly like one I'd seen in a receipt I'd filed away. A $12,000 client appreciation gift that had struck me as unusually expensive at the time. I scrolled back through my memories, recategorizing moments I'd dismissed. The late-night client emergencies, the weekend professional development conferences, the sudden interest in upgrading his wardrobe with designer suits and expensive cologne. The signs had been there for months, maybe years. Just last week he'd come home with a new custom-tailored suit, explaining away the expense by saying he needed to look successful to attract wealthy clients. I'd even helped him pick out a tie to match, standing in our bedroom, adjusting his collar while he checked his phone impatiently. "Big meeting?" I'd asked. "Potential new client. High net worth," he'd replied distractedly. "Don't wait up tonight." Now I wondered if he'd worn that suit, the one I'd helped select, to wine and dine his mistress while I stayed home working on our household budget, trying to figure out why our expenses seemed higher lately despite my careful planning. The changes had been gradual. First it was just working later at the office. Then came the business trips that seemed to multiply. His once reliable call to say goodnight when he traveled stopped happening. He became protective of his phone, changing the passcode and positioning it screen down whenever he set it aside. I told myself it was work stress. His firm was growing, taking on wealthier clients, managing more significant investments. Success came with pressure. I had been proud of him, of the life we'd built from nothing. Our house in Oakwood Estates wasn't a mansion, but with its 4 bedrooms and updated kitchen, it was nicer than anything I'd imagined owning when I was growing up. We didn't take extravagant vacations, but we had a comfortable life. At least that's what I'd thought. More messages from Amber popped up on my screen. Another photo of them at what looked like a resort, his arm around her waist. "We've been planning this for months." He says, "You're too trusting, too boring. Did you really think a man like him would stay with someone like you forever?" Each word was a knife, but instead of collapsing, I felt something hardening inside me. I thought about our joint checking account with the emergency fund we'd built together. I thought about the investment accounts I monitored every month. I thought about the client trust accounts I helped reconcile, and the irregularities I'd noticed recently that Mark had dismissed when I questioned them. I set my phone down, my hands no longer shaking. If Mark and his mistress thought they could blindside me and leave me with nothing, they'd severely underestimated the woman who had kept their financial house in order for 15 years. I opened my laptop and logged into our bank's website. Then I pulled up the document where I kept all our account information. It was time to protect myself, and possibly others, from the man who thought he could take everything. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I began transferring funds from our joint savings to a new account I'd create later. But something held me back. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with first. This wasn't just about money, it was about 15 years of my life. I closed the laptop and stood up, my legs unsteady as I walked to Mark's home office. The room had always been his sanctuary, a space I respected by knocking before entering, even when he wasn't home. Today I pushed the door open without hesitation. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, illuminating the neat, organized space. His mahogany desk dominated the room, flanked by filing cabinets and bookshelves filled with financial reference books and family photos. Images of a life that now seemed like an elaborate charade. I sat in his leather chair, running my hands over the smooth desktop. Where would a man like Mark hide things from the woman who managed his paperwork? I pulled open the side drawer where he kept his current client files, finding nothing unusual. The top center drawer contained pens, paper clips, and business cards, all perfectly normal. Then I noticed something I'd never seen before. The bottom right drawer, which normally held office supplies, had a small keyhole I'd never paid attention to. Mark's keys were always on his person, but I knew he kept spares. I went to our bedroom and checked his nightstand, then the kitchen junk drawer, finding nothing. On a hunch, I reached up to the top shelf of our closet where we kept luggage and pulled down his carry-on bag. In the front pocket I found a small key ring with 2 keys. Back in the office, the smaller key slid perfectly into the drawer's lock. Inside was a burner phone, a stack of hotel receipts bound with a rubber band, and a small notebook. The phone was password protected, but the hotel receipts told their own story. The Grand Hotel downtown, the Lakeside Resort an hour away, and even the Four Seasons in Chicago when he told me he was at a financial planning conference in Detroit. Each receipt showed charges for 2 spa services, room service, champagne, premium dining. My hands trembled as I picked up the notebook. Inside were account numbers, transaction notes, and a list of clients with stars next to certain names. Some had large dollar amounts written beside them, far exceeding what I knew their portfolios to be worth. "Oh, Mark," I whispered, my voice hollow in the quiet room. "What have you done?" I recognized the names with stars. Elderly clients who trusted Mark implicitly, who brought him homemade cookies at Christmas and showed him photos of their grandchildren. Mrs. Wilson, a 72-year-old widow whose husband had left her well provided for. The Johnsons, a retired couple who'd worked for the school district for 40 years. These weren't just accounts, they were people who believed in him. I returned to my laptop and logged into the firm's accounting system, pulling up these clients' files. What I found made my blood run cold. There were discrepancies between their official statements and the actual accounts, small enough to go unnoticed by trusting clients, but adding up to substantial sums. Transfers had been made to holding accounts that weren't part of the firm's standard practice. I'd noticed some unusual transactions during my bookkeeping work, but Mark had always had plausible explanations. Special investment opportunities, temporary holding patterns to maximize returns. I trusted him because, well, he was Mark, the man who helped elderly neighbors with their taxes for free, who organized the annual charity drive at his firm. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. While building his affair, he'd apparently been building something else. A financial scheme that could ruin not just our lives but the secure retirements of people who trusted him with their life savings. My phone chimed again with another message from Amber. We're going to buy a beach house with the bonus he's getting. He says you'll never see it coming. Attached was a photo of tropical real estate listings. The bonus had to be connected to these irregular transfers. The timeline was becoming clear. Mark wasn't just planning to leave me. He was preparing to disappear with money that wasn't his. I printed key documents from the accounting system, screenshots of the questionable transfers, and copies of the handwritten notes. Then I photographed the hotel receipts and the notebook contents. Evidence. Protection. The doorbell rang, startling me. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor Carol holding a plate of cookies. Just thought I'd bring these by, she said cheerfully when I opened the door. Jim and I are so excited about your anniversary party next month. 15 years is something to celebrate. I forced a smile. Thanks, Carol. That's so thoughtful. Everything okay, honey? You look pale. Just a bit under the weather. Please thank Jim for me. After she left, I leaned against the door, clutching the plate of cookies. The anniversary party. Another upcoming event I'd been planning while Mark was planning his exit strategy. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. The familiar message now carried new meaning. Was he with her? Or was he moving money around, preparing for their grand escape? I returned to his office and carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. Then I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him, not yet. Knowledge was power, and right now I had knowledge he didn't realize I possessed. I needed to act carefully and quickly. There were innocent people who stood to lose everything if Mark succeeded in whatever he was planning. And there was me, the wife who'd helped build his success, who'd believed in our shared dreams, who was now facing a future very different from the one she'd imagined. I picked up my car keys. It was time to visit the bank. A different bank than the one where we held our joint accounts. It was time to protect myself and, if possible, those trusting clients. The shock was transforming into something else. A clear-eyed determination that surprised me with its intensity. Mark might have betrayed our vows, but I wouldn't betray my principles. Whatever happened next, I would face it standing on solid ground. The morning rush at First National Bank worked in my favor. No one paid particular attention to another professionally dressed woman waiting in line during lunch hour. I'd chosen this branch specifically because it was across town from our usual bank, reducing the chance of running into anyone who knew Mark or me. When my turn came, I approached the counter with a calm I didn't entirely feel. I'd like to open a new account, please, I said, presenting my driver's license and social security card. Individual account, not joint. The young teller, her nameplate read Jessica, smiled brightly. Of course. Let me connect you with one of our account specialists. Minutes later, I sat across from a woman named Diane, whose gray-streaked bob and no-nonsense demeanor suggested experience. Just a basic checking and savings to start? She asked, typing my information into her computer. Yes, and I'd like to discuss options for secure transfers, I replied, choosing my words carefully. I'm reorganizing my finances. Something in my tone must have registered with her. Diane's eyes met mine and her professional smile softened slightly. We have several secure options, she said. Many of our clients find themselves needing to establish independent finances for various reasons. She didn't ask for those reasons, and I appreciated her discretion. Within 45 minutes, I had a new checking account, savings account, and temporary online banking credentials. I'd make the transfers once I returned home. Is there anything else you need today, Mrs. Adams? Diane asked as she handed me my new bank cards. I hesitated. Actually, do you have a recommendation for a good attorney? Someone who specializes in financial matters. She pulled out a business card from her desk drawer. Linda Mercer. She's excellent with complex financial situations and very discreet. I took the card, noting the handwritten cell number on the back. Thank you. Mrs. Adams, Diane said quietly as I stood to leave. Whatever you're dealing with, don't wait too long to get legal advice. I've seen too many clients who wish they'd acted sooner. I nodded, my throat tight. I won't wait. Back in my car, I called Linda Mercer's office from the parking lot and was surprised to get an appointment for 3 p.m. that same day. A cancellation had just opened up. That gave me 2 hours to return home and make the necessary transfers. At home I moved methodically. First I transferred half of our joint savings, $127,462, to my new account. Legally, I knew I was entitled to at least half of our marital assets. The inheritance I'd received from my grandmother when she passed 3 years ago, $43,000 that I'd deposited in our joint investment account at Mark's suggestion, I transferred in full. That money had never been marital property. I left our checking account untouched except for $2,000 I moved to cover immediate expenses. Mark would notice the other transfers eventually, but I needed time before that happened. Next came the more difficult task: documenting the questionable client transactions. I created a secure cloud folder and uploaded all the evidence I'd gathered: screenshots of transfers, photos of Mark's hidden notebook, copies of statements showing discrepancies. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was creating a record that might protect innocent people. Just as I finished, my phone rang. It was Tina, one of my closest friends and, coincidentally, the wife of James Peterson, one of Mark's 3 business partners. "Hey Sarah. Just checking if we're still on for coffee tomorrow." I froze. Tina and I had a standing monthly coffee date, usually a highlight in my calendar. But tomorrow I couldn't pretend everything was normal. "Actually, I'm fighting a bug," I lied, hating the deception but knowing it was necessary. "Can we reschedule for next week?" "Of course. Feel better soon," she said, concern evident in her voice. "James mentioned Mark's been working crazy hours lately. Said he's bringing in some big new clients. You both deserve a vacation when things settle down." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. "Thanks, Tina. I'll call you next week." After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone. James, Mark's most senior partner, had no idea what was really happening. The realization strengthened my resolve. Mark's partners deserved to know what was happening in their firm. At 2:45, I arrived at Linda Mercer's office, a modest suite in a professional building downtown. Linda herself was not what I expected. Younger than me by perhaps 5 years, with a practical ponytail and minimal makeup. Her handshake was firm, her office organized but not ostentatious. "Mrs. Adams, what brings you in today?" she asked after we were seated. "I've discovered my husband is having an affair," I began, "but that's actually the least of my concerns." I handed her a folder containing printouts of the most damning evidence. "I believe he's been misappropriating client funds from his financial advisory firm, and planning to leave the country with substantial sums that don't belong to him." Linda's expression remained professional as she reviewed the documents, but her eyebrows raised slightly at certain pages. "This is quite serious," she said finally. "These transactions, if they are what they appear to be, constitute fraud. Have you confronted your husband?" "No. His mistress contacted me this morning, gloating about their plans." "He doesn't know that I know anything." Linda nodded. "That gives us an advantage. Mrs. Adams." "Sarah, please." "Sarah, I need to be clear about something. What you're describing goes beyond divorce territory. This is potential criminal activity. If your assessment is correct, there are obligations to report this to regulatory authorities." "I understand," I said quietly. "These are people's retirement funds, their security. I can't look away from that." "Then here's what we need to do," Linda said, pulling out a legal pad. "First, secure copies of all documentation in multiple locations. Second, prepare a statement of all marital assets and your separate property. Third, and this is critical, we need to inform your husband's business partners immediately before more damage can be done." I felt a wave of relief at having a clear plan, at not being alone in this nightmare anymore. "How soon can we contact the partners?" I asked. Linda checked her watch. "I can have a brief ready within 2 hours." "How quickly can they meet?" An idea formed in my mind, something unexpected but perfect in its simplicity. "I know exactly where they'll be tonight," I said, thinking of Mark's text about working late. "And I think I know how to ensure Mark can't dismiss these allegations or talk his way out of them." For the first time since reading Amber's messages that morning, I felt a sense of control returning. Mark had underestimated me, had assumed my trust meant blindness, my loyalty meant weakness. He was about to discover how wrong he'd been. Linda and I worked through the afternoon, organizing the evidence and preparing a concise briefing for Mark's business partners. By 6 p.m., the documents were compiled, and Linda had drafted a formal letter outlining the discovered irregularities. We had also prepared a USB drive containing digital copies of everything: transaction records, Mark's secret notebook, and the messages from Amber. "Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" Linda asked as we finalized our preparations. "We could schedule a formal meeting tomorrow at my office." I shook my head. "Mark told me he's working late tonight. I know exactly where he'll be, at La Maison with Amber. It's their favorite restaurant." "And his partners?" "I just got a text from James's wife confirming they're having a partners' dinner tonight to discuss a new client acquisition. Mark told them he'd join after finishing some paperwork." I felt a bitter smile form. He never specified what kind of acquisition he was working on. I checked my phone and saw another taunting message from Amber: "Picking out my outfit for dinner tonight. He says you think he's at the office. So clueless." Attached was a photo of a black dress laid out on what I recognized as the bed of an upscale hotel room, likely the downtown Marriott where Mark kept a loyalty account. "I need to text his partners," I said, suddenly certain of my next move. I crafted a message to James, the senior partner and closest to Mark. "James, I've discovered some concerning financial irregularities in the firm's accounts. I have documentation you need to see immediately. Mark isn't at the office, he's at La Maison with someone. This can't wait until tomorrow." His reply came quickly: "What kind of irregularities? This sounds serious. Client funds being moved into unauthorized accounts. Substantial amounts. I've been helping with the bookkeeping for years. This isn't a mistake. I'll meet you there at 8:30. The plan was simple. I would arrive at the restaurant first, position myself where I could observe without being seen, then alert the partners when they arrived. They would confront Mark with the evidence and I would step in only when necessary. I dressed carefully: a navy blue dress I'd worn to countless firm functions, pearl earrings Mark had given me for our 10th anniversary, light makeup. I wanted to look composed, professional, unbroken by the day's revelations. At 7:45 I parked a block away from La Maison and walked the short distance, my heartbeat steady but rapid. Through the restaurant's front windows, I could see Mark and Amber already seated at a corner table. She wore the black dress from the photo, her blonde hair swept up to reveal diamond earrings I'd never seen before. Mark was laughing at something she said, looking more relaxed than he had at home in months. I stepped inside and spoke quietly to the maitre d'. "I need a table with a view of the corner booth but where I won't be easily seen." He raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course, madam. This way." From my strategic location, partially concealed by a decorative plant arrangement, I could observe them without being obvious. Mark ordered an expensive bottle of champagne, something we would have considered an extravagance for a special occasion. Amber ran her fingers along his arm as they talked, leaning in to whisper something that made him smirk. At 8:25 my phone buzzed with a text from James: "Just parked. Robert and David are with me." "Where are you?" "Inside already. Mark's at the corner table with a woman. I'm seated near the bar. Enter quietly and I'll signal you." When the three men walked in, all in business attire, faces serious, I felt a moment of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? Would this public confrontation solve anything? Then Amber laughed loudly, drawing attention from nearby tables, and my resolve hardened. She was wearing a bracelet I recognized from Mark's secret receipts. $12,000 of client money transformed into a glittering band on her wrist. I caught James's eye and nodded toward Mark's table. The three partners exchanged glances, then moved purposefully across the restaurant. Mark's face registered shock when he saw them approaching. He quickly composed himself, standing to greet them with forced casualness. "James, guys, what are you doing here? I was going to join you later." "We need to talk now, Mark," James said, his voice level but firm. "About client accounts." The color drained from Mark's face. "This isn't the place." "It seems appropriate, actually," Robert cut in, glancing pointedly at Amber. "Considering what we've just learned." I watched as Mark tried to maintain control, suggesting they move to the bar for privacy. Amber looked confused, then annoyed as the conversation clearly wasn't going as planned. "Who are these people, Mark?" she demanded. "You said we were celebrating tonight." "They're my business partners," Mark replied tightly. "Just a work matter. Give us a few minutes." James placed a folder on the table, the summary of evidence I'd provided. This isn't a few minutes conversation, Mark. We've seen the transfers, the hidden accounts. What have you done? The moment stretched as Mark stared at the open folder. His expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally desperate calculation. This was when I decided to make my entrance. I stood and walked deliberately to their table, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Mark's head snapped up at the sound, his eyes widening in recognition and then horror as understanding dawned. Sarah, he choked out. What are you? How did you? Your girlfriend introduced herself this morning, I said evenly, nodding toward Amber. She was quite informative about your plans. Amber's smug expression faltered as she connected the dots. You're his wife? But. Yes, I'm his wife. The one who's been helping with the bookkeeping for the past 7 years. I turned to the partners. Did you show him the transfers from the Wilson and Johnson accounts? James nodded grimly. We were just getting to that. Mark's face had gone from pale to ashen. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain. The waiter approached with their entrees, oblivious to the tension. Your filet mignon, sir, and the lobster for the lady. Mark waved him away impatiently. Not now. Sir, would you like to settle the check first? There seems to be an issue with the card you provided. What issue? Just run it again, Mark snapped. I'm afraid it's been declined, sir. Mark pulled out his wallet, hands slightly shaking, and produced another card. Try this one. The waiter returned moments later. I'm sorry, sir. This one has also been declined. Mark's confused, panicked expression was something I'll never forget. The dawning realization that I had acted first, that the carefully constructed exit he'd planned was crumbling around him. What did you do? He whispered, looking at me with a mix of rage and disbelief. I protected myself, I answered simply. And the people who trusted you with their life savings. As the partners began discussing next steps, contacting authorities, securing client funds, I watched Amber quietly gather her purse and slip away from the table. Mark didn't even notice her leaving, too focused on his imploding world. I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for what could have been and a quiet certainty that I had done what needed to be done. The night that was supposed to be another celebration for Mark and Amber had become the night everything changed for all of us. The weeks following that night at La Maison passed in a blur of legal meetings, financial audits, and quiet, tearful evenings alone in the house that no longer felt like home. Mark was facing multiple charges: fraud, embezzlement, misappropriation of client funds. The financial regulatory authorities had frozen all his personal assets pending investigation, though my separate accounts remained untouched thanks to Linda's quick action. Amber vanished completely. No more taunting messages, no appearances at court hearings, nothing. According to James, who had become an unexpected ally, she'd emptied her apartment the day after the restaurant confrontation. Mark refused to provide information about her whereabouts when questioned by investigators. She was just using him, James said during one of our meetings to discuss the firm's recovery plan. Classic case of someone targeting a man going through a midlife crisis. I didn't respond. In some ways, Amber had done me a favor by exposing the truth before more damage could be done. Without her messages, who knows how long Mark's scheme might have continued. The first real test of my strength came 3 weeks after Mark's arrest, when I had to meet with Mrs. Wilson, the elderly widow whose retirement fund had been among those Mark had targeted. I'd insisted on being present when James explained what had happened and the steps being taken to recover her funds. Mrs. Wilson arrived at the office clutching her worn leather purse, her gray hair meticulously styled. She'd brought homemade banana bread, a tradition whenever she visited the firm. I don't understand, she said after James outlined the situation. Mark helped me pick investments for Howard's insurance money after he passed. He showed me the growth every quarter. Her voice trembled slightly. Are you saying that was all made up? Not all of it, I said gently, touching her hand. Some of your investments were legitimate. But Mark created false statements showing higher returns than you were actually getting, and he diverted some funds to his personal use. But why would he do that? I trusted him. Howard trusted him. The pain in her eyes was almost too much to bear. I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head dozens of times, but nothing prepared me for the reality of facing someone whose trust had been so completely betrayed. Mrs. Wilson, I said, choosing my words carefully, What Mark did was wrong in every possible way. But I want you to know that I'm working with the firm to make sure you don't lose a penny of what you entrusted to us. I pulled out a folder containing the recovery plan I'd developed with James and the remaining partners. My detailed records of all transactions have helped identify exactly what happened to your funds. The firm's insurance will cover some losses, and the partners have agreed to personally guarantee the rest. Mrs. Wilson studied the papers through her reading glasses, then looked up at me with unexpected compassion. This must be so difficult for you, dear. After all these years together. Her concern for me, despite her own losses, brought tears to my eyes. I'm focusing on making things right, I managed to say. It's the only way forward I can see. As we worked through similar meetings with other affected clients, I found myself drawing on strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Financial acumen honed through years of bookkeeping, communication skills developed through community volunteer work, and a determination that grew stronger with each client we helped make whole again. 2 months after that fateful night, James approached me with an unexpected proposal. Sarah, we need someone to head our client services department. Someone who understands our systems and, more importantly, someone our clients trust. After seeing how you've handled this crisis, the partners and I believe that person is you. The offer stunned me. James, I don't have the credentials. You have something more valuable, integrity and experience. We'll support you in getting any certifications you need, but the position is yours if you want it. I didn't answer immediately. Working at the firm would mean facing daily reminders of Mark's betrayal. But it would also mean continuing the recovery work that had become so important to me. I'll think about it, I promised. That evening, I wandered through the house that had once represented our shared dreams. The real estate agent had already listed it, and there was interested buyer, a young family with 2 children. Walking through the kitchen where I'd prepared countless meals, the living room where we'd entertained friends, I realized I wasn't just mourning my marriage but the future I'd planned within these walls. On the mantel sat a photo from our 10th anniversary, Mark and me on a weekend trip to the coast, both smiling broadly at the camera. I removed it from its frame and placed it in a box with other mementos I wasn't ready to discard but couldn't bear to display. The next day, I accepted James's offer with one condition: that I could develop a program specifically focused on financial protection for women in vulnerable situations. He agreed without hesitation. 6 months later, I closed on a small craftsman-style house closer to downtown. Nothing fancy but entirely mine. As I unpacked boxes in my new home office, I found myself thinking about how different my life looked from what I'd imagined just a year earlier. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Tina, James's wife, carrying a houseplant and a bottle of wine. "Housewarming," she explained with a smile. "The plant's a peace lily. They're practically indestructible, even for those of us without green thumbs." We sat on my small porch, sipping wine and watching the sunset. "I still can't believe everything that happened," Tina said. "James says the firm wouldn't have survived without you." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed to be done." "That's underselling it a bit," she replied. "You know, when you first showed James those records and transfers, he couldn't believe it. He kept saying, 'Mark's the financial genius and Sarah's the quiet one.' Now he says you're the smartest person at the firm." I smiled at that. Not the smartest, just observant. And maybe a bit underestimated. After Tina left, I stood in my new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the beginnings of a new life. There were still difficult days. Court hearings where I had to face Mark, nights when I questioned every decision that had led me to this point, moments when grief hit unexpectedly. But there were also victories. The satisfaction of helping clients recover their funds, the growing attendance at my financial literacy workshops for women, the simple pleasure of making decisions based solely on what I wanted. From the ashes of what Mark destroyed, I was building something stronger, something entirely my own. The woman who had received those taunting messages months ago, the woman who had been described as too trusting, too boring, had discovered reserves of strength and capability she never knew she possessed. Mark's mistress had been right about one thing: he did take everything when he left. What she hadn't anticipated was that in losing everything I would find myself.